their efforts. Take advantage of this knowledge base. We are really, really lucky to have Jeff here today. Mr. Carlini is going to do the official introduction.
Hey guys, for those of you that don't know me,
Yeah, definitely take notes.
my name is Joe Carlini. You may know me as Billy's dad. Billy Carlini is a senior here. And so I was asked to help Mr. Osmond and Mr. Kelly put together a business ethics, social responsibility class. And I couldn't think of anybody better to kick it off than my friend Jeff Cherry. Jeff and I went to college together, played football together many years ago. He's an expert in social responsibility as it relates to business. You guys chose to be in this class. Your attention to Jeff would be great, and I think you're going to learn something today. Jeff?
How you doing, guys? Good. First things first, I'm not here to talk at you, I'm here to talk with you. So if you guys have any questions at all throughout the presentation, throughout the talk, please chime in, raise your hand, throw something, whatever you want. Get my attention. So any questions are welcome. I asked the last class, so I know that you guys have chosen to be in this class. It's sort of like an elective, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you've chosen to be here. So that's good. It gives me a little context. Before we get started, let me ask you, why did you choose to be in this class? Anyone who's popcorn style, 2 or 3 guys, tell me why you chose to be in this class. You know, the Malvern prep baseball guys, they got to take those jackets off. They're not Under Armour yet. I mean, I'm from Baltimore. Jesus. All right. Anyway, why did you choose to be in this class?
I think some of the things that we learn are going to be like useful in our life when we like live alone or we're away from home.
Okay.
It applies to the real world more than like a history class.
What do you mean by that?
You can take more out of this than I feel like into the real world, like with the stock market or just investments in general. Other than if I took history, I wouldn't be able to really apply it to a job or anything that could help me in the real world.
Okay.
I knew I wanted to do study something like this in college, and I feel like a lot of people have gone to college without a class like this before, so why not get a step ahead?
Okay. Good. All right. Thank you. One other question. So we're going to talk a little about business and capitalism today, obviously. What's the purpose of business? Anyone can answer this.
To make money.
Okay. To make money, he said. Anyone else? Any other opinion? Anyone want to second that opinion? Anyone have no idea?
Having someone buy into what you believe in.
Good one, okay. All right, well, we're going to talk a little bit about the idea about the purpose of business, and as you see here, the power of purpose. So let's talk about where we are right now. Hey, how many of you guys are working outside of school? Do you enjoy your jobs? Do you love your job? Yeah? All right. So there's an old comedian, George Carlin, once said, most people work just hard enough not to get fired and get paid just enough money not to quit. That sounds like that's your no, I'm not saying you don't do a good job. It says you work just hard enough so they won't tell you to leave. And they give you just enough money so you'll stay around. That's, that's probably more the norm than not, right? Okay? If you think about what's going on. There's another idea that, that comedy usually comes from, satire, usually has a piece of truth in it. So let's investigate the truth for a second. A company called Gallup, which is a polling company based in Washington, D.C., polls, society about lots of things. But they've been doing a poll for about 15 or 20 years now about what we call employee engagement, which means how happy are you at work, how engaged are you in your job in the company. And the numbers have been pretty stark and pretty steady for about the last 15 or 20 years. 70% of employees in the United States are what we call either disengaged or actively disengaged. Disengaged means I just don't care, right? I'm here, I do the job, but I don't really care that much. Actively disengaged means I'm trying to sabotage the company. So think about, they have a crew team here at Malvern Prep. Yeah. Let's talk about if you were in a crew team and you had 10 people in the scull, and 7 of them, 3 of them were not rowing, and 4 of them were smacking you on the head with their oars. That's what it looks like right now in the state of business in the United States in general, right? So another poll that's been taken by a company called Edelman, they do a thing called the Trust Barometer, and they ask, do we trust CEOs? And only 37% of people in the United States trust CEOs in general, which means that 63% of people in the United States don't trust CEOs. They think CEOs are full, right? Another piece of reality. And finally, this is the one that sort of always gets me, that WebMD, which is a website about health, did a survey of doctors and hospitals, and they found out you're more likely to have a heart attack on Monday morning than any time during a week, right? So what does this tell me? We don't like our jobs, we don't trust our CEOs, and work can actually be killing us. Not a great place to start from if you're thinking about going into business in the future, is it? How did we get here? Is a question I always ask myself. So, in September of 1970, a guy wrote an article for the New York Times. You guys, anyone read newspapers anymore?
No.
I would suggest that maybe you want to start, even if you do it online. Some of the most successful people I know do three things in the morning. They read their local paper, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times. Just saying. Anyway, guy wrote an article in the New York Times in 1970. Have you guys studied a guy by the name of Milton Friedman yet?
We did monetary policy, so they have some basic background in money and
Okay.
The
Milton
Fed.
Friedman's an economist, a lot on monetary policy, but Milton Friedman wrote an article in the New York Times, and that article said something to the effect that there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources to engage in activities designed to increase profits, so long as it does so within the bounds of the law without fraud or deception. So someone said, what's the purpose of business? I asked, someone said to make money. That's what Milton Friedman believed. That's what he wrote in 1970. We think there's a different way to think about the purpose of business. Milton Friedman was an economist. Peter Drucker was a business person, a management thinker. And he said it's management's public responsibility to make whatever is genuinely in the public good become the enterprise's own self-interest. See the difference between those two things? Our belief is the purpose of business is not to make a profit. The purpose of business is to serve society. Peter Drucker once said, businesses don't make money. Businesses make notebooks or jackets or shoes. And how they do that will either turn a profit or not. And a lot about that has to do with the way society feels about that business, right? That's sort of where I think that we're going. The purpose of business is to create value first for society. And if you do a great job at that, then you'll create value for shareholders. So that's the sort of context of this sort of discussion we're going to have today. I'm going to go through the next series of slides pretty quickly because they're mostly about me, but a little bit of it will give you some insight into why I believe what I believe and how I got here. So, as Mr. Carlini said, we went to college together. I graduated from Catholic University in 1985 with 2 degrees, a master's and a bachelor's in architecture. I saw an architectural firm in 1986 called Lloyd Lamont Design. We were in a very competitive business in a very competitive time. And I've always been sort of an amateur follower of Winston Churchill. And Churchill once said, first we create our buildings, then they create us. He was talking about, if you studied World War II, the Germans were bombing Britain, and after the Blitzkrieg, whether they were going to rebuild the House of Commons as it was or not, that's what he was talking about, the feeling they got from being in that space. But we know today that this is actually more true than he understood. I used to do some work with Mr. Carlini in San Diego, and I work with a group out there called the Academy for Neuroscience and Architecture. And what they do is they study the impact of the physical environment on the brain. So we took that as a way to think about how we were going to practice architecture. So our business was about helping our clients get better at what they did by manipulating their physical environment to drive performance, to drive behavior amongst their employees. think about it this way. I know this is a temporary space. If you're taking classes here versus taking classes in one of the buildings that have been here since the 1800s, or one of the new buildings, there's a different feeling in that building. Would you guys agree to that or not? So that's sort of the basis of this. And then the second thing that happened to us in 1989, remember we started in 1886, we had a bunch of clients asking us, hey, have you ever heard of this thing? It's called the PC, personal computer. You know, there was a time in life when there weren't any personal computers, and I lived through that. I know, it sounds horrible, but I did. But we had these clients coming to us asking us, how is a computer going to change the nature of their work environment? Because remember, we were designing office spaces for clients. We scratched our head and said, how the hell are we supposed to know? We're architects, we're not technologists. But we got asked that question enough time that the torque steer of our clients moved us to learning more about technology. What we found is that our clients were asking us the wrong question. They were asking us about light and heat and power and air. And what they should have been asking us was, am I ever going to need an office again? And if so, why? Because with your Mac and your laptop and Wi-Fi, you can work from anywhere. You can work from anywhere, right? I know that the architect that's designing the new building here has talked about this idea of the third place. The third place, that notion was created by Starbucks, that they were thinking that because of technology, because of communication, you don't have to be home, you also don't have to be in the office, you can be in a third place to work. And Starbucks was built around that idea. So we figured for our clients that they were asking us the wrong question, and we need to get smarter about technology if we were going to be able to help them. Then we found that this consulting company in New York City hired 100 architects in their New York office. And when we figured out what that was about, we came to the conclusion that we could create a new type of business which had architecture, technology, and management consulting all brought under one roof to try and help our clients get better at their jobs. And I'm telling you this because we learned something throughout this process of building this business. But this is sort of what we had at the end of that story. And as consultants, we were getting customers that were asking us two different types of questions. One question is what we call money questions. Can you help us drop costs and raise revenue? If business is about money, who said that? Who the one who read it? Right. So if business is about money, it's really important for us to drop our costs and raise revenue, right? The lower our costs, the higher our revenue, the more we have to take home at the end of the day, the higher our profits, right? So we have lots of customers coming to us saying, can you help us drop costs and raise revenue? Of course we can. Well, we hope we can. That's why we're in business too. We had another set of companies that were asking us a whole different set of questions about relationships. How do I get my employees to care about the place the way I care about it if I'm the CEO or the manager? How do I get my suppliers to feel like partners and not like servants? I want them to bring me innovations. How do I get communities to welcome me in instead of putting up barriers to entry? Because barriers to entry are expensive, right? And most importantly, how do I get my customers to understand I want to be in a relationship and not in a transaction? Because transactions are by nature transactional. Customers who feel like we're just in a transaction, what are they looking for? Next best deal, the next best price, as opposed to a customer who wants to be in a relationship. So think Michael Jordan versus LeBron James. Right? Stayed with Chicago his whole career. He was in a relationship. It wasn't a transaction, right? Which turned that into one of the greatest franchises of all time. So I want my customers to be in a relationship. So it was interesting that we got that series of questions, and the customers, our clients, they were asking us those people questions versus those money questions. It's pretty simple. If I want you to care about me, what should I do?
I care about you. And then
Care about you first, right? If I want you to care about me, I should care about you first, right? These companies that were asking us the people questions were creating what we call now a culture of caring, right? They were doing things in order to create that culture of caring that were more about what we call now social responsibility, but they were doing it in a completely different way. They were doing it in a way that was embedded in their business, and lo and behold, they were our most successful clients. So we're starting to see this idea that business is not just about the money. Business is about relationships. It's about something else. We didn't know what to call it, but we saw it happening in real time. At this time, we were doing work with a guy by the name of Raj Sisodia, who was a professor. He still is. He's at Babson University, the entrepreneurship school. He was at a college in Massachusetts called Bentley College at the time. And Raj was doing a program in his MBA course that simply was, he had a bunch of MBAs going around talking to customers, people who are doing business with other businesses, and saying, tell us about a company that you love, and why do you love that company? And he said, he called us and he said, it's interesting, you guys are going to get this. We've been doing work with Raj. He says, you're going to get this because I keep getting the same names over and over and over again. Everyone loves Whole Foods. They love Southwest Airlines. They love Honest Tea. Names that we were familiar with, but we saw this happening, as I was saying, from the people questions versus the money questions, right? And he said, not only that, the deeper we get into this research, don't answer that phone. The deeper we get into this research, it's not only the customers that love these companies, suppliers love working with them, communities love having them in their community, employees want to work there, and lo and behold, these companies are making more money.
Yeah, he is.
That research that Raj was doing turned into a book that I worked on for about 1.5 years called Firms of Endearment. Firms of Endearment was a inspirational book that talked about the idea that there was a new narrative being developed about business, that business wasn't just about the money, that it was about how we treated each other. So I worked on this book for about 1.5 years with Raj. Subsequent to that, Raj wrote another book called Conscious Capitalism, which is sort of the basis of what we do, that he wrote with John Mackey, who was then the co-founder and CEO of Whole Foods. The first book was sort of an inspirational book. The second book was sort of a how-to book. So everything that we've done up until now has been based on the foundation of all that learning we had when we were in a consulting company working on those 2 books. We sold that consulting company off in pieces, and we had learned a lot of things. We decided that this was really important to us, that I'm a capitalist, but sometimes capitalists do stupid things, and we wanted to support this new narrative about capitalism, so sold that company, started a hedge fund. Launched the fund in 2000, launched the research for the fund in 2006, launched the fund in 2008. I'm a New Yorker, but I'm not a Wall Street guy. I had a job at Wall Street once. I was a bike messenger for 1 summer. It's the only work I've ever done on Wall Street until I moved back to New York. And between 2008 and 2012, I had another partner, Mr. Carlini knows this guy, so he knows I'm telling the truth. We knew nothing about Wall Street. Between 2008 and 2012, the 2 of us raised $700 million. Worst time to start a hedge fund. You guys are a little young to remember what was going on there, but the financial world was falling apart. If you've ever seen the movie The Big Short, we were right in the middle of it.
We just sort of covered some of this.
You did, okay. So you know what was happening. So how did we do that? How did we raise that much money in that period? Well, we found something that worked. We found an idea that if you stop focusing myopically on the money and start focusing on the nature of your relationships with people, you'll be successful. Because people will want you to be successful. They'll be engaged in your success. We knew that we felt that this was the right thing from our consulting days, but then we were able to prove it out on Wall Street. So that's sort of the beginning of the story. But then the idea is, if what we want to do is change the way people thought about practice capitalism, which I think is sort of the ethos of this center you guys are starting, was a hedge fund going to be the way to do that? We decided it wasn't. It was going to be a grassroots thing. So we started this thing called the Conscious Venture Lab, which is an accelerator for mission-driven businesses in Baltimore, as well as Shift Ventures, which is a fund, an investment fund where we invest in businesses that come through our program. I won't bore you with sort of our mission, but I do want to talk about this. Everything we do is based on this foundation of this idea of what we call conscious capitalism. There's really 4 things that we focus on when it comes to conscious capitalism. 1, what's the purpose of your business? We know that the purpose of business is not profit. Let me tell you a quick story. We have sort of one of our gurus is a professor at the University of Virginia at the Darden School of Business. His name is Ed Freeman. Ed describes it this way. I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure that if any of us in here stops creating red blood cells, we're going to die. There's some fact to that. But if I asked you, is the purpose of your life to create red blood cells? You're not going to say yes. You're going to say the purpose of my life is I want to play in the NFL. I want to be president of the United States. There's all sorts of things that you're going to go to say the purpose of my life is not to create red blood cells. It's not just survival. But if you don't create red blood cells, you're not going to have a life. The same thing is true with business. If you don't create profits, you're not going to have a business for very long. But if you focus only on creating profits, you're not going to be fulfilled in anything that you do, right? That's the way we think about it. So this whole thing of societal purpose, what's the purpose of your business? How do you build a culture around that, which we talked about already? There's this culture of caring that these companies develop. How do you feel about leadership? We're going to talk a little bit more about leadership in the end, this idea of servant leadership, that I'm here as a leader to serve others. They're not here to serve me. And this notion of how do I manage my business on a day-to-day basis for stakeholders and not just manage my business for shareholders. Shareholders are a stakeholder, they're just not the only stakeholder. That's the nuance you have to get, all right? So quickly, this is important because we care about it as a society. If you studied Maslow and the hierarchy of needs, as we get older, we start to care more about what we can do for others as opposed to what we can get.
You guys did that management class when you were in college.
What's that?
You haven't had like any of that in Maslow.
Okay.
You think in a management class, you'll take that.
Okay. So, trust me on that. You'll learn it, that we are getting older as a society, and because of that, society is moving in a way where we start to care more. So, millennials, 73% of millennials say that business is more about them making profit. Millennials want to work for companies that are values-based. They want to do work that matters. They want to buy from companies that support causes they care about. I imagine that you guys think about this as well, right? When you go out, you can, you know, we say every day you purchase something, you're voting with your dollars, right? So we all want to work with, buy from people that we care about, we think that care about us. So this is really sort of taking hold in society. I'm going to blow through this. And I tell people all the time, I'm a nobody. I'm just a guy who's out here doing work and trying to make things happen. I'm an investor, but I don't have any money. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, has all the money. He's the biggest investor in the world. And for the last 2 years, every year, he writes a letter to the CEOs of the companies that he invests in. And for the last 2 years, essentially, he's been telling them, you need to care more about purpose than just profit. So you don't have to listen to me. You can just listen to Larry Fink, the guy with all the money. So the reason that he cares about it, because he knows that thinking like this, as we talked about at the beginning, drives performance, right? It makes us better businesses. It does this because we're shifting priorities, right? As a society, our priorities are shifting away from just what we can get to what we can do for each other. How can we include each other? So all of this is happening in the midst of this sort of studies that you guys are getting into now about ethics and social responsibility. The reason I asked that question in the beginning about what's the purpose of business, and every time, you're not alone, someone says to make money. And we have, as I said, you have to make money if you're going to run a business, or else it's just a hobby, right? But what that tells us is the rest of this idea that we're talking about, the reason you guys have chosen to take this class, if you have an interest in ethics and social responsibility, it's not the norm. Everyone's not thinking this way. And what does that do to us, right? So because it's not the norm, we get things like this. Exploding oil rigs in the Gulf of Mexico. You guys, were you guys around when this was happening? Right? British Petroleum, right? We get things like this. Collapsing garment factories in Bangladesh. These are some of the what we call the rough edges of capitalism for companies and executives and entrepreneurs who are focused myopically on the bottom line, on the shareholders. We always say that when you separate purpose from profit, you leave a space in the middle for bad things to happen. This is not to suggest that these are bad people. It's to suggest that if their focus is on money, if the incentives are only there, we are incentivized to do things that might yield stuff like this. Right? So we need to find a way out of that. If we are capitalists, and I am a capitalist, we need to find a way out of that. We need to find a way to support companies that think differently. The other thing that we're finding out, and this is a little bit off topic for what you guys are doing, but I would suggest it's important for you to think about, that there's an intersection happening between what's going on in cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, Detroit, Baton Rouge, St. Louis, cities that used to be big in manufacturing. They've lost a lot of jobs. They've seen a rise in crime and a rise in underserved communities. That there's an intersection between this notion that business can be a force for good and how we create social justice in cities. We're seeing this happen all over, and in no place has this been more stark. I said early on that I live in Baltimore. 2015, a guy by the name of Freddie Gray got killed in the back of a police van, and after that, the town exploded in riots. And if you think about, we're trying to figure out why did that happen in Baltimore? What was going on? And everyone's like, well, it's policing in minority communities, and that was a big part of it. But there was another part of it. This is a map of what we call the innovation ecosystem in Baltimore. These dots show where all the venture capital firms are, where all the startups are, where the lawyers that deal with innovation, all the accelerators and incubators, all those things where people are starting businesses. As you can see, they are, in Baltimore, they call this the white L. That's where all that stuff is focused. Here, in West Baltimore, there's one little dot, and it doesn't take a genius to figure out where the riots started. The riots started in West Baltimore. I was friends, and still am, with the mayor at the time, Stephanie Rawlings-Blake. I had a discussion with her. I said, this is not about Freddie Gray. This is about 40 years of underinvestment in minority communities around the city. And this idea that there's an intersection between business as a force for good and social justice is something that we need to gather around and we need to work on. So there's some lessons we can learn from what happened in Baltimore. I'm going to give you guys that. I'm going to talk a quick 2 stories about leadership. I'm going to open it up for questions if you have any. The first lesson is this: the facts of economic life are based on markets and, more importantly, on decisions made by executives and entrepreneurs. You guys are the next community of decision makers, right? So whether or not cities like Philly, Baltimore, and Detroit, and Baton Rouge, and St. Louis continue to go in the direction they're going in, or turn into something better, is in broad measure going to be up to you. And up to the decisions you make. You guys are the best of the best. When you leave here, you go to college, you start your businesses, those decisions you make are going to be predominantly responsible for a lot of that, what goes on there. So we think about economics from time to time like a science, like physics. I contend that economics is more of a social science, that it's not like the laws of physics, that it really is about decisions that we make and we can change them. 2, we think that society is only capable of being truly great if everyone is included in the economic opportunity. So that, again, is this intersection between business as a force for good in society and social justice, right? We know that there's a connection there. lesson number 2. And lesson number 3, therefore, building more purpose-driven companies is a key component to economic inclusion. So having everybody included and the idea of we can all be prosperous together and social justice. Let that sink in for a second. We asked a couple of questions at the Conscious Venture Lab. What if entrepreneurs and investors cared as much about people as they do about profit? A lot of the work we do starts with, what are the questions we're asking ourselves? And what are the assumptions we're making about the way that the world is? And might we be wrong? What if the way we built companies was a catalyst for a more just society, not just a catalyst for personal enrichment? Right? It's another idea that we say, what if we're wrong about the way we think about business? What if the purpose of business is something other than we've always been taught? If we're right about that, we think we can shift the work world to change the real world, right? That we can use business as a catalyst to create a better society. And I think that's a lot about what this is all about. So 2 quick stories about leadership, because we believe that leadership and culture are sort of the foundation of all of this. This is a rally outside of a grocery store called Market Basket in New England. The guy in the picture there in the middle was the CEO of Market Basket, which is a family-owned company, owned by his family. But they got big enough to have an external board of directors. The external board wasn't happy with what he was doing. They fired him. They fired him, and everybody quit. No one came to work the next day. I said, I'm going out to the grocery store to get some cheese, and then we eat cheese there because everybody quit. Whenever we do this talk for entrepreneurs and executives, I ask them, raise your hand if you think that if you got fired, all your employees will quit to save your job. Not a lot of people raise their hands, as you might imagine. This is the day he got rehired. He's a baker or a butcher, I don't know who he is, we found this picture. But if you look at the joy in that guy's eyes, we ask ourselves, what type of leader did that guy have to be to get people to follow him in that way? Right? People think that leadership is by virtue of your position or by virtue of your title. Leaders aren't made because of their title or position. They're made because of the way they make people feel. This is another a dynamic leader who was very close to Mr. Carlini and I. His name was Sean Mulholland. He was a brigadier general in the Army. Sean passed away a couple of months ago. He was my roommate in college, played football with me. And one time I asked Sean over beer, I said, you know, I knew a lot of guys that worked with Sean, worked for Sean, a bunch of Navy SEALs I know in Baltimore that worked under him. Everyone talked, you know, glowingly about his leadership, and he would take people into the most dangerous places in the world. And I said, Sean, how do you get these guys to do this? Some of these are 18.